From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Ageless Enthusiasm. Coming up on this Ageless Enthusiasm, I speak with a communication and conflict resolution coach who gives us a step-by-step guide to process conflict.
If you and I were in an argument, Mindy, I would say, okay, tell me what's going on. You obviously were hurt or upset, tell me what's going on. So I would listen.
Okay.
But I'd then listen to understand.
I also visit with a forensic handwriting expert who shows us clues to compatibility and finding the right partner.
And all those traits describe your inside story, who you really are, where you've been, what you've done, and it will tell me a complete story of your life.
All this and more coming up on this episode of Ageless Enthusiasm. Mindy East, and welcome to Ageless Enthusiasm. On this show, I have a communication and conflict resolution expert, Mark Olsey, who's going to teach us about the pledge of a lifetime. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Mindy. It's been great to be here already. Just having some fun sitting here with you.
Yes, we've had a little bit of conversation.
Yeah.
And you have written a book. It's called The Pledge of a Lifetime.
Yeah.
Her Hope for Connection and His Guide Through Conflict. What made you think about writing a book of this magnitude?
So I've been doing marriage counseling for 35 years, and I've sat for literally thousands of hours watching couples in front of me try to communicate and to work through conflict. And over and over and over again, I just watched where they would somehow derail the conversation and almost start arguments or fights in front of me. I mean, literally, sometimes I'd almost like jump out of my seat and have to say, stop, like be a referee or something. I mean, you wouldn't believe the kind of arguments I saw people in front of me.
I bet.
Right in front of me. So I learned from observing what they were doing that, again, caused the conversation to go south, if you will. And then I also talked with my wife and said, honey, I think this is an area that we've done well, resolving conflict. And I compared what I learned here and what she and I learned and put together and developed an understanding that really there needs to be some order to a healthy conversation.
A step-by-step guide.
Right. And so out of that came a step-by-step guide or process that I created that we call Pledge.
Okay. So Pledge Talk is an acronym.
Yes.
And instead of, punching someone in the throat.
Not a very good thing.
No. Tell us what the letters mean.
Sure. I normally take about an hour and a half. I'll do it in like 30 seconds if I can, or less maybe like that.
I'll time you.
Okay, go. So 6 steps, right? The first thing is that when any one of us finds ourselves in a conflict, somebody should hit the pause button. That's P. Because if we don't hit the pause button, things are going to get worse, almost for sure, almost guaranteed. So hit the pause button, take a breath, let our emotions dial down. Good.
Okay.
Remind ourselves that, hey, this is my wife, this is my friend, and my coworker. I want to keep it that way. So I get myself into a better mindset and remind myself, too, that they have a story like I do.
Okay.
And then I need to take the next step and be willing to listen to their story.
Okay, there's the L.
So I listen, if you and I were in an argument, Mindy, I would say, okay, tell me what's going on. You obviously were hurt or upset, tell me what's going on. So I would listen.
Okay.
But I'd then listen to understand what it is you want me to hear.
That's a good point.
Yeah, because all too often we're listening, but for the wrong thing. I'm listening for all the things that you got wrong, so I can correct you as soon as I have a chance. Not real helpful. So I would listen to hear what you want me to hear. And then I go to the third step. Once I think I understand what you want me to hear, I'll go to echo it back.
The E.
So I would say, I think this is what you're saying.
You mirror it back to them.
I check back to clarify. And then you get to know if I heard you correctly, and I get to know if I heard you correctly, and so forth. And if I did, if you go, that's it, that's exactly what I said. Then I go to the next step, which is disarm. And it's disarm the tension between us by validating your thoughts. Something like, as simple as something like, okay, I can see what you're saying. That makes sense. I can see why you're hurt or frustrated. Thank you for sharing, that's helpful. And when I do that, the tension between us is just like drops. And the reason is because you don't have any more reason to argue with me, because now I understand. I've heard you and understand.
And you're not fighting back.
Exactly.
You're
Right. So that's disarm by validating. And then there has to be a little bit of a quiet moment right then. Because if I say, okay, that makes sense, but.
no buts.
There's no buts. Because then I'm actually invalidating what I just validated. And that doesn't really help. So I get quiet. I disarm by validating, and I get quiet. Do that kind of a thing. And after a moment, you're likely to say something like, well, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to give me? The fifth step, give. And then I would share my thoughts, and you would pause, listen, echo, and disarm me. And then we go to the last step, which is really engage. It's the word is engage, but it's really the idea of going around, perhaps a second time, a third time, back and forth like this, until we really come to a place of really understanding what happened, and we resolve the conflict. Or at the very least, we're in a much better place relationally if we still disagree in some way. But it really helps the relationship.
I like that because, I know by looking at me, you probably can't tell that I've ever argued, but
No, I can imagine.
But when people argue, it seems like one person, maybe both people, want to be right.
I think it's universal. When we're in a conflict, we almost always tend to think we are, and then we want to get the other person to agree with us.
This would have a great application and add value, I'm sure, to the workplace, right? You can customize it.
Sure, really, pretty much any place, because we're in relationship with people in our family, with our children, with our neighbors, at a church. If you go to a church, in a business place, everywhere we are, we have relationships, and communication is critical, and we have conflict. I was teaching this to 5 men in a Zoom class here earlier last week, and one of them was a businessman, and he texted me or emailed me like 2 days later and said, I'm so thankful I took your class last night. He said, I was in a business meeting we were sitting at one table, and there was another business we were trying to do some work with, and they were undermining what I was saying and actually accusing me some things. But because I took your class, I stayed in the pause mode. And I just kept listening and even echoing back and even validating some of their concerns. And as a result, it turned the thing completely around. And it brought us to a place where we could make some good progress together and move forward. And he was so thankful.
That is wonderful. Well, I think a lot of people who have issues with communication is because they sense everything as an argument. If I understand the pledge talk concept, but the person I'm trying to relate to doesn't, how do I move forward?
Sure. That's a really good question. It's a question I get asked often. And it really comes down to the ultimate goal that I'm teaching people. When I'm teaching people the concepts of pledge, I tell them, I usually teach it using the idea of we're in a conflict and I go through the steps like I did with you, but I tell them at the end that ultimately I'm not teaching this to help people to resolve conflict. I'm ultimately teaching people how to communicate in a healthy and helpful way, and how to ultimately to do it with love as the greatest purpose.
That's great.
And so if I'm talking with you and you have no idea what the steps are, and maybe don't even care to do so or care to know them, I can still use the principles myself in the way that I relate to you, and in so doing, be respectful and be honoring of you as a person, and ultimately even loving you in our relationship.
And make a difference.
And make a
You'll
difference.
make a difference.
Absolutely.
Mark, do you have another success story that you're very proud of?
I have another one that jumps into my mind immediately. It was another man, interestingly enough, because oftentimes men aren't really as good as communication, but he learned the process, took it home, taught his wife and his 8-year-old son, and 2 days later, his son comes in the house and says, Dad, I'm teaching this to my friends, and it's helping me with my friendship relationships as well.
Wow.
I loved that.
That's amazing.
And then the same guy also said to me, and one more thing, he said, Mark, he said, before I took your class, he said, quite honestly, I was, I felt powerless when conflict took place because I didn't know what to do. I never knew how to handle it. But he said, now, because I learned what you taught me, he said, now I see myself as an empowered conflict navigator.
Oh, and he's able to step back and take a little breath.
And use the principles
That's
to navigate
amazing.
every
That's
conflict that he
amazing.
experiences now from here on out.
Wow.
I love that.
I love that too. I'm going to have you sit tight for
Okay.
just a minute, and I'm going to hear from another communications expert, and we'll be right back with you.
Sounds good.
Okay. My next guest is a forensic handwriting expert who teaches us how our handwriting affects our compatibility to finding the right partner. Welcome to Ageless Enthusiasm, Kimberly Gordon. Hi, Kim.
Hi.
Tell us what a forensic handwriting expert is.
Forensic handwriting expert is someone that can actually look at anyone's handwriting, and it picks up, you can see each letter that you write picks up traits. And all those traits describe your inside story, who you really are, where you've been, what you've done. And it will tell me a complete story of your life.
How are things going in a different direction with our school system with the onset of computers?
Taking handwriting out of school is actually a big mistake. Because handwriting, what that does, once you've done cursive handwriting, actually builds empathy within that child. And then you have that empathy throughout life.
Well, and with, you know, if you send your resume online or you fill out an online application, you don't have that opportunity to write and get that handwriting out. And also journaling is very important as far as our mental health and wellness,
Yes.
right?
Yes, journaling is very good, but journaling, like say you've been through a traumatic episode and you're journaling to try to help relieve that. You can journal for that, but you're carrying that trauma in the handwriting. And if you don't know what letters to change to heal that process, then you're reintroducing that trauma back into the subconscious every time you write.
We're talking today about compatibility in partners. So that's where your therapy background comes in. You take someone's handwriting, and rather than spending endless hours on a couch rehashing, you look at their handwriting.
Yes.
So we have two examples here just to see whether or not these two people would be compatible. One's male, one's female. So can you just give an overview of what you look for in that?
Well, it's what you want to look at when you've got someone that you're interested in and you get their handwriting. Lay both your handwritings side by side. And you actually want your handwriting to be pretty close to whoever the other individual is. So what you want to look at is you want to look at overall size. This individual is written a little bit bigger. This one's a little bit smaller. So since this one is writing, think of when you're looking at handwriting, the smaller the handwriting, then you go up to larger handwriting. So when you think of small, you're thinking of sitting back, being by yourself and being more
Reserved,
reserved,
maybe.
yes. And then when the bigger the handwriting, the more outgoing the individual could be.
Like, ta-da!
Exactly. So the other thing you want to look at is the slant. So whether that slant leans to the left, or if it's vertical, or if it begins to lean to the right, that will play a big role in if you're compatible with that individual. On this one, this is a slight right. This one is more of a vertical with some left added into it.
And you're not reading the words, is that
No.
correct? You don't even, and of course I can't because I don't have my glasses on, but you're just looking at the
Overall handwriting.
The overall handwriting.
Yes.
Do margins matter?
Yes, margins even matter because when you look at a piece of paper, this is your universe. And where you put that first letter that you write, that tells me a little bit right there. And where you end tells me a little bit. If you're doing a complete page, that will tell me a lot. But margins do play a role. So the first letter you write is you. Anything after that is the universe and someone else. And the closer you go to the right-hand side, this is the present, this is the past. So if I see somebody margin-wise that's going clear to the end here, that's telling me that they've still got difficulty dealing with the past and they haven't got through it yet. The closer that they write going to this page, that they're still looking forward to the future. They've got things going on.
These look like healthy individuals.
Yes.
They're both
This is good.
good. What else do you see?
The other thing you want to look at is vowels. See that the vowels are all opened. Vowels are communication letters. So if the vowels are open, they're a good communicator.
Oh.
If they're closed, you've got like selective hearing going on. So you want to make sure that the vowels are open. That will make a difference as well. The other thing that you want to look at is the lower loops, anything in a lower
An
in the lower
I
zone.
or a Y?
Yes.
Okay.
The lower loops is basically the energy levels, the intimacy levels. That's going to tell you whether you're actually intimate. Could make a go of it that way with individuals, because you've got individuals that don't want to be that intimate, and you've got the ones that want to be overly intimate.
Okay,
So you want to watch for that.
A couple wanting to move forward should both be about the same in the lower.
Pretty close, pretty
Okay.
close.
Okay.
But you can have the discrepancies. You can't have the difference, because again, when you're doing like a profile and setting this up, other traits come into play. Because if the lower zone doesn't actually meet up, maybe that vertical individual can compensate for that and make a difference.
So we can make changes and
Yes.
we can adapt
Yes,
based on what you tell people how to rewrite their letters.
yes.
Okay.
And it
Are
can make a
people
difference.
usually open and receptive to that?
Yeah, it's pretty much. Yeah, they are. But it depends on, like, what I find, especially with the males. They're like, what? You know, they take a lot of it as criticism, which it's actually trying to help the individual be able to be more compatible with someone else. Because when you do these profiles and you see if someone is compatible, why it's such a good idea is because you have so many traits in here. And when you get into a relationship, believe me, when you start getting into it, love is definitely blind right off the bat. You're not going to see a lot of these traits, and down the road they begin to pop up. So if you don't recognize them or know what they are at the beginning of the relationship, they can cause issues down the road.
So if a couple comes to you and they're madly in love, but yet slightly unbalanced, you help them get on the right page, so to speak.
Yes.
Oh, did you see what I did
Yeah,
there?
that was very good.
Okay, so it's always not lost if someone
Exactly.
isn't quite compatible.
Yes.
Then they can actually adapt and get closer together.
Well, to give you an example, I worked with a young couple that in the traits, like the young girl, her way of showing love was to be all lovey-dovey all over the young gentleman and to be all over him and just huggy, hold hands, the whole thing. She was real mushy. That was her way of showing love. His way of showing love was to help with the dishes, the vacuuming, and to help clean house. That was his way of wanting to show love. He didn't actually like to be all snuggly with her. But they're in the beginning of the relationship, and he was doing it because it's what she wanted.
Sure.
But if you don't know these traits at the beginning, down the road is what's going to happen. Like, say, one evening she says, come and watch TV with me and snuggle with me. And he's like, let me finish the dishes first, or let me finish doing this first. And she begins to think, why won't he come and snuggle with me? What's going on? Is he seeing someone else? Why isn't he here? And then the thought process begins. And then he's like, why is she so angry with me? Because I'm not over there sitting with her when I'm trying to
I'm
help her out
helping.
here.
I'm
Exactly,
helping.
because she's not getting it.
Right.
So then the disconnect begins. And then the communication begins to fall down because they're not understanding each other, how they're showing love. But if you know this in the beginning, then it's like, okay, well, when you're done, come over and sit with me because I know you're showing me how much you love me.
And those
And
are
it makes a difference.
the love languages.
Yes,
you know, so
exactly.
there are other ways to figure that out too, but it's nice that you can spot that
Yeah.
for them and help them
Yeah.
if they haven't taken the
So,
love
and
language.
a lot of the things that you see in this, you have that option. Can you live with that down the road? And if not, and you don't think you can work through it, then why put yourself through all that
Right.
misery all these years?
Right. Well, thank you so much for being my guest
Thank you.
today. And I appreciate it. And we'll look forward to seeing you some other time.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Now we're back with Mark Olsey. Mark, men need a sexual release about every 3 days, and women need a verbal release every 3 days. Can you tell us a little bit about how pledge talk can help that be a more cohesive situation?
Well, I can tell you that we all long for relationship. And all too often, I think, men look at women and say they just want to talk. And sometimes, or all too often, I think women just look at men and think all they want is sex. particularly perhaps in a marriage or ongoing relationship like that. And my thought is both are longing for connection. Both are longing for relationship.
True.
And for him, yes, maybe he needs or wants sex every 3 days, but I will tell you it's not just about sex. It's about connection. And so much even more than that. Because when the wife says, yeah, let's do this, and she's not only agreeable, but wants it, desires, receptive to it, it does something to him. It helps him to feel like, it calms inner anxieties, it helps him feel wanted, and like he is, like he matters. And so that helps connection from him to her. And when that happens, he's far more receptive then to relational intimacy. And so the cycle starts then. And it could start on either side. If he, on the other hand, says, hey, sure, hon, let's talk. Let's sit down. Let's have a conversation. Let's go for a walk and let's communicate. I tell you what, it increases her receptivity to the idea then of sexual intimacy as well.
Oh,
that's huge.
That is huge. That's huge. So I know that you speak from experience because although you've been counseling for 34 years, you've been married for 43 years.
Yeah.
And your lovely wife, Zarin, is a school teacher here in Wichita. Tell me what you guys enjoy doing as a couple.
Almost our entire married life, I know this sounds simple, but on some level, we just like taking walks. And I think a lot of it is because it's a time of connection away from everything else, and we can just connect. But the other thing, most recently we started doing is we like riding a tandem bicycle.
Oh, that's too funny.
There's a whole funny story behind that of a neighbor, an old neighbor who had this old tandem in his shed, and he said, Mark, would you like a tandem? And I said, well, Kenny, I would. I'd love to do that. And we got into it and loved doing it. Because now wherever we go, we're together, right?
Right.
It enables us to communicate.
Are you in the front or is she? You
I'm
take
usually
turns?
in the front, but she says that's fine. She doesn't want to steer that thing in the front.
Right,
So I gotta do
that's
that.
cute. I love that.
That's fine.
Well, that's an amazing way to stay connected.
Thanks.
Yeah. Mark, when you turned 50, what was the biggest lesson that you learned?
Good question. Immediately what comes to mind is the idea that, boy, life goes by fast. And now having turned 60, even more so, it goes fast. So what strikes me is I want to make every moment of my life count. And I've been around long enough, and I think your audience has been around long enough to know that, it's not all about collecting things, making a lot of money. All that stuff ultimately is really kind of empty in life. But what really matters most is relationships.
Oh, true.
So I want to make them count the most. And so this is why I'm passionate about helping people to learn how not only to resolve conflict, but to use these principles, even just in everyday conversation. Because as you and I listen well, for instance, to really understand each other, and even echo back sometimes and just be affirmative of what each person is saying, it helps deepen our relationship. And that's what I would hope your audience could really experience, the deepening of connection with all relationships, because there's nothing in life that matters more than that.
And there are no relationships this side of heaven that are ever permanent. So we have to think about that too.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite scripture or quote?
I think of the proverb that says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. It's just like, I often think about that because literally every word that rolls off your tongue and mine has the power to bring life,
Give life.
or death. Again, for every relationship, friendship, you and a child, you and your mate, every word. That's a really sobering idea.
It is.
And really throughout every conversation, every day, we can be life-giving.
Yes.
Like I think you are with your enthusiastic way of being around people. Or we can actually be a downer and bring death.
Right.
And I want to bring life everywhere I go.
Oh, I totally agree. That's a good one.
Yeah, way cool.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mark, for being such a good guest today. I appreciate you being on.
Thank you, Mindy. This has been great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity and being with you as well.
Thank you. And thank you for watching Ageless Enthusiasm, and we'll see you the next time.